I have actually, in the past year and a half, I've studied Cunningham a lot. I studied abroad in London, England, at London Contemporary Dance School, and took Cunningham the whole time I was there, and learned a Cunningham piece, Fielding Sixes, and then when I came back to Purchase, learned another Cunningham piece, Inlets, while continuing to study the technique. And it's been really, I feel really privileged to have learned some of the repertory, because it just allowed me to understand the technique better, and to just like it more, because I had taken it before I ever learned rep, and before I studied it so intensely, and I was never that interested in it. But after learning the rep and realizing really how difficult everything is that Cunningham is asking of you, it made me really care about the technique and respect Merce Cunningham so much for everything that he did for dance.
I think it's interesting to see, because he came from the Graham Company, you can see what he took from Martha Graham's concepts, just ideas about the torso and how it can twist, and that I feel like even though the movement isn't necessarily initiated by the pelvis in Cunningham's work, you can definitely see that the strength of the core is very important. And I agree with Jenny, I wasn't really too interested in the technique itself, but once we learned inlets, I realized how hard it was, and then taking technique class with Dream Freebury really helped, I think, with doing the piece and just understanding that it's different from every other modern technique, but you can still see elements of ballet in it. You definitely see ballet lines and tendus, and yet you have a very modern torso that's not very elegant and necessarily pretty like ballet, but it's very strong and stable, but it can still move. So it is a very difficult technique.
Yeah, I kind of came into Cunningham 3 or 4 years ago not knowing what it was about or who he even was. So it was really strange, the first class, that we repeated the exact same couple back exercises all the time. But I got so strong and on my leg, and I was able to do all these amazing things, especially the semester where we worked on inlets. So we had class 2 or 3 times a week of Cunningham, and then rehearsals 3 times a week for 2 hours. And just the stamina and strength you have to get through that piece is amazing. And just transfers of weights, shifts, balancing. I wasn't even aware of all that you had to do to be able to do the piece. And it was just so great to work with his movement. And what we did with the inlets piece was we actually set it up and organized it into different the sections. We used his actual notes and the I Ching to say which steps we did and where we were going in space and chance operations, which was really cool to learn how he was doing something like that. And we put together a piece that was great, and it was original work of his movement, but our spin on it. Mm-hmm. But it was done the same way he had.
Well, he had his own phrases that Jean Freebury taught to us. He had
maybe 80 something phrases.
Oh.
And then each phrase had as many shifts or something. Did you tell us?
Yeah, I think with this particular piece, Inlets, I think he had a certain number of phrases that it was somewhere under 100, but it was a very high number of phrases, around 80 or 90 or something. And each phrase had a different number of shifts of weight. So the first phrase 1 had 1 shift of weight in it. And that's kind of how he developed the phrase work. And then from there, he used his chance procedures, which we got to experience. Basically, what was the first thing we did? We rolled a die to choose
if you start
what phrase we were doing first, right?
No, we used the I Ching to decide which phrase to do. And we didn't do the I-chain procedure. Our teacher did.
She showed us
how to do it,
once.
and it involved
like a few different
concepts.
Really complicated.
And then so we had
it's really confusing. We have some notes if you want to look at
and
them.
we had the notes, and we rolled the dice or flipped a coin to see whether we started on stage, how many people were doing it,
how the transitions worked, like if people stayed on stage even if they weren't doing the phrase while other people were, or if they exited, where they were facing.
Yeah, and then we had his original notes of how he divided up the stage into different sections, and you could only enter or exit from the corners, and then the stage was divided into a grid, so it was 1 through 8, and then we had to roll the dice to where you had to start the phrase and where you had to finish the phrase.
Yeah, so for example, like you would start the phrase, you would roll and it would tell you to start the phrase, say like upstage right, and then you would have to figure out, like as the dancer, what path you would take to end up downstage left. And it had to take the entire phrase to do it, so if you had like a really long phrase that traveled a lot, you might have to go like weave in and out of people, and so that was like a large part of the process was with each other, figuring out how to make it work, how our pathways would cross, and how to get where we were supposed to be. And from what I understand, like with talking with Jean and also my Cunningham teacher from London, Jeannie Steele, that's what he does with his dancers all the time. Like it was basically like our process is he would tell them, okay, start here, end here, do this phrase, and then he would tell that to 6 dancers on stage, and then they would all figure it out and make it work for him.
Another thing I just realized is that we didn't rehearse with music. And the piece is a piece by John Cage. I'm not sure what the actual piece of music is called, but very typical of John Cage. It was just kind of like random sounds because he was interested in just everyday sounds, not what normal people would call music, but I think it fit with the piece. And so we didn't actually set it to music until I think a few days or the week before we showed it in the GTL, and it was just kind of like popping bubbles or something like that, and then there would be a conch shell that would sound every minute or so. And so without music, we had to really have the counts in our head that Jean would set up. We would rehearse each phrase over and over so that we can hear her voice in our head when we're doing it, and then we would breathe together and just hear that, and that's how we would stay together. So that was also another element.
Yeah, the Cunningham company, they used to not hear the music until the day of the show. So they'd be on stage premiering piece, and they'd hear the music for the first time, and they'd have to just not be influenced by it at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way he works with timing in that way, because he would always work with a stopwatch, so he would say the piece needs to be 15 minutes or whatever. So that's for our piece, we always used a stopwatch, and she's like, oh, today it was around this, let's try to make it a minute faster. So we would speed up a couple of things, and so the dancers had to just find that rhythm and try to make it consistent to make a 20-minute piece, so that he could put on 20 minutes of music, and the dance would fit to it, because they never rehearsed with the music, so they would use a stopwatch and figure it out like that. I think a lot of if I were just to say offhand without any personal experience with it, I would just probably say that Merce's, one of his main, I guess, theories or ideas that he was interested in working with was just separating all the elements of performance. So the music, for example, we know already is completely separate. The dance can stand on its own. And then the same thing, I think he worked with sets. So he, I don't know. That's just another random idea about him. But that's all I can say about set work. I don't know. I feel it was probably not always necessarily necessary or to the piece or something, just an extra element that made it more interesting to him or to the audience. Do you guys agree?
I think so.
As an audience member, seeing a work like that where everything is separate, the dancers have to figure things out on stage, it makes the piece like present. It makes it come alive because you're seeing things happen. I mean, that's how all dance is, but I feel like for Cunningham, it's like being created and danced at the same time. And it's also interesting for an audience to have to put those separate ideas together themselves, because he didn't piece it together and like throw it at you. It's almost like you're seeing the entirety of each component and you decide how those relate or how they don't relate, or how you're only going to listen to the music, because a lot of people don't like Cunningham because it is very stark, or it's not in your face like some dance is. But what I love about it is that it can be so simple, but I guess say so much with the vocabulary that he's created. And there's not a lot of expression in the body or anything like that, but somehow that starkness comes through in a completely and totally different way than any other dance form. And as a dancer, the technique, I feel like dancing Cunningham is completely different than watching it. And it's very fulfilling as a dancer because you see these things that seem so awkward and that they don't work or impossible. Like literally, we've been in class and I'm like, that's impossible, I can't do that. And then you do it, and it's really amazing to see how what he's done in his body can translate to so many other bodies, because it's so natural in a way, where it's, you know, your body balances itself out and it works somehow. It's kind of cool.